Okay, so we're going to be talking this week about personality judgment. What that means is kind of our assessment or our judgments about somebody else's personality, or it even could be about our own personality. So some of the objectives we're going to be going over, we're going to discuss why the assessments you make about your personality is important, or about others is important. We're going to discuss the criteria that can be used for assessing accuracy of those assessments. And we're going to go over the realistic accuracy model, or RAM, and then discuss some of the accuracy of self-judgments. So as we can see here, this is actually, I wanted you to look at this only because it kind of gives you a flair for what the research into some of this looks like. But one thing that they might do is, as researchers in this field, looking at personality assessments or judgments of others, is they might give you different faces and ask you about what you think certain traits are about that person. You know, you look at these faces and you say, hey, looks like a really friendly face? Or do you look at this face and say, hey, this is a really competent face? In this case, it looks like these guys are trying to overlap some of the friendliness and competence. Maybe this one has more of that friendliness to the competence, and this one has more of the competence to the friendliness. And then you have down here where this one person looks more competent, where this one looks more friendly, right? Now, I show you this, but really we look at people all the time, and it might be their face, but it could be other factors. And we make judgments about those, the traits about the personality based on what we're looking at. And people do this all the time, right? We're constantly looking at people and making little assumptions. And it's important that we do that because we're trying to look for people or that will match a situation that we're looking for. Maybe it's somebody that we want to get close to. Maybe we're trying to figure out who do we need to stay away from. Maybe it's somebody who you think might be able to help you with a problem. But we're making these assessments of who do we think a person is. And a lot of it has to do with sometimes just the way we look at something. Now, we're going to be evaluated in terms of how accurate we are at this, though. How accurate is it that we can look at somebody and then just kind of assume or make some assumptions about their personality based on what we're seeing? And so, you know, some of the opportunities of doing this is well, it could help us in certain ways of like employment and friendships. Think back to a time when you were young and maybe you were new to a school and you walked into the classroom and you said, I don't know anybody. Who should I look for? I need a friend. Quick, right? And so you might look around the room and you try to figure out who looks like somebody who will either A, match my interest, or B, be friendly enough to allow me to tag along so that I don't feel so bad, right? Now, we could be absolutely wrong with our judgments. So for example, shyness. Let's say that you look around the room and you see somebody and they're just a shy personality, but you look at them and you say, oh, that person's cold and aloof. They don't want to be my friend, right? But shyness can also be maybe this self-assuredness, but unfortunately you misperceive that, right? So that's important to take note. The other thing is that we might actually influence how other people's personalities are. And so we can do that through what we call expectancies, right? And with expectancies are behaviors, are basically behaviors that are influenced by others and how they expect us to act, right? So let's say, for example, we have like intellectual expectancies. And so a good example of this would be something called the Pygmalion effect. And if you've never heard the Pygmalion effect, it's basically how teachers treat different students based on their own kind of perceptions of those students. So, for example, you know, if a teacher assumes that you're very intelligent, sorry, that's my dog. They think that you're very intelligent, right? Well, then they might sit there and say, oh, okay, this person can handle more, right? Or, you know, I can put a little bit more effort into that person because they can handle it, right? And so this can feed into different things like the climate that the teacher sets. So maybe the teacher kind of has like this warmer attitude, or makes it more of like a warmer emotional attitude towards that student, where they're very caring and kind and willing to take more time out of their, right? Maybe they give more feedback, right? So they're going to give different feedback than they give other students that they may not deem quite as smart or intelligent, right? So they might sit there and say, okay, this person can handle more meticulous feedback, and therefore I'm going to put a lot more effort into getting them to understand the concept, rather than this other person that I don't think might be able to handle that feedback. It could be the input that a teacher is putting in, right? So maybe a teacher attempts to teach more and more difficult material, and the output as well. So the extra opportunities that this student gets to show what they know might be a little bit different, right? So just because the teacher thinks a student is more intelligent, all of a sudden the way that they are treating them is different. And we find that those students that are put in those positions tend to do a little bit better, regardless of if that they're the teacher's right about the intelligence. But a lot of times the student will actually measure up, and it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy for a student. It's like, oh, the teacher thinks I'm smart. I think I'm smart. Therefore, I'm going to study more. Therefore, I'm going to put more effort into my projects. Therefore, I'm going to sign up for more extracurricular activities. I'm going to try to set my goals a little bit higher so that, I can go to medical school. I don't know, whatever you think it is, right? But all of a sudden, you're living up to these self-fulfilling prophecies because you now have this expectation that I'm a smart person. I can handle this. Now, this is also could be a social expectancy. So in this case, this is actually that attractive people were expected to be more warm and friendly. We expect people that are attractive to be more friendly and open and polite. And it's interesting because we find that actually people that are attractive respond in this way, and that could be because they feel like they're this social pressure to act in that way. But it seems like we've looked at this over and over again. It seems like the more attractive somebody is, the more warm and open they tend to be, and that might be partially to, as a social expectancy effect. Now, how about this expectancy effects in real life? Where does this expectancy generally come from? Right? Well, real test results and observations of performers and behaviors and information from acquaintances, right? We can gather this information from lots of different places. But we find that a lot of times these expectancies are likely to be correct in some ways, right? Which is kind of strange. But they kind of magnify or maintain behavioral tendencies. People keep up the look that provides this feedback from others. So, for example, smart people might put themselves out there to show their intelligence more, right? And so especially strong when held by one or more important people for a long period of time. So if your parents like kind of said to you, hey, you're this trait, you're this courageous person, right? All of a sudden you might be more prone to putting yourselves in positions where you can show that courageousness. Maybe you become a police officer or a firefighter or something like that. Nope. Oh. No, doesn't want to change. Uh-oh. Oh, that's not good. Hold on. Okay. So, what criteria can be used to assess this accuracy? Well, here's the thing, is that there's really two trains of thoughts when it comes to this. There is the constructivism perspective. And constructivism is this philosophy where you believe that reality is not really this concrete entity. It doesn't exist. And that really only ideas or constructions of reality exist. And that's where that construct part of constructivism kind of rears its head. Basically, that when we're looking at personality, we've created these social constructs, and they're not real. We've decided that these things are constantly like evolving and changing because we are actually constructing them, right? And so if you ask somebody who's more of a constructivist about the accuracy, they'd say there's really no accuracy that can be done this way because, well, we are constantly constructing these things, and therefore there's not really a reality to it. And then there's the critical realism. Critical realism is a different type of philosophy in that the absence of perfect or infallible criteria for truth does not necessarily imply that all interpretations of reality are equally correct. So, somebody who is more of a constructivist might say, it doesn't really matter because there's no real way to be accurate since it's all made up socially, whereas somebody who is a critical realist might say all information can be helpful and we can't be 100% accurate, but that doesn't mean that we can't make some assumptions to some level of accuracy. Now you can have either of these, and I'll let you kind of figure out which one you feel is best for you. But they have, what we're really looking for is we're looking for criteria for accuracy. We're looking for things that are going to, when we're looking at these judgments, we're looking for validity to what we're looking at. And that comes through what we call convergent validation. And what convergent validation is it's the process of assembling diverse pieces of information that converge on a common conclusion. So we are constructing, but we are also getting closer to that converging characteristics when we have multiple people that are kind of looking at the same thing. So what do I mean by that? Because I feel like this is a little bit convoluted and I might have lost a few of you. Well, let's say that we're looking at some sort of personality trait. Let's say that we're looking at talkativeness. So we're looking at how talkative somebody is, right? And so, my definition of what talkativeness and your definition of what talkativeness might be a little bit different from one another. But what we're hoping is that when we're looking at it, if we're looking at different things, maybe we can figure out, well, where are they converging? And where they're converging, that adds to the validation of, okay, this is really where that sense of validity, are we measuring what we really want to measure, is. Oh, okay. Right? So maybe my definition of talkativeness is somebody who even in quiet times can't help but talk. And somebody else's is somebody who just naturally takes over conversations and also talks during times where they shouldn't be talking, right? And you're trying to converge and get some agreedness to it. One thing that we can do is called the duck task, which is if something has several characteristics of a duck, then it's likely to be a duck. So maybe if you're looking for a duck, I might think of a duck as having a bill and having feathers and having being more prone to being near water, and different characteristics, laying eggs, right? Now you might sit there and say, yeah, a duck also has a bill and it has feathers, unless it's molted, and maybe then it doesn't have feathers, but usually it has feathers, and it does lay eggs. And so we're looking at, okay, look, the confidence increases when all of a sudden some of these characteristics, you're seeing them converge with each other, right? And so now we're like getting that validity to one another. We also want that inter-judge agreement. Inter-judge agreement, this is the degree to which two or more judges of the same person provide the same descriptions of the personality, right? So the more judges who agree, the more likely that judgment is to be correct, right? If all of us are judging the same thing and we are all coming to the same conclusion, well, that's a good indicator that we have some accuracy to what we're saying, right? And similarly to like behavioral prediction, which is the degree to which a judgment can predict behavior. So we can also call this like predictive validity. So, we might sit there and say, okay, we've what is courage, for example, right? Well, if I say courage is the person who's going to put themselves into harm's way for the benefit of somebody else, right? All of a sudden, well, what would that mean if I find somebody that I say that's a courageous person? Well, there might be a predictive element of, let's say there's a burning building with a baby inside. That person that I've deemed courageous might be that my prediction of them is that they'll run in and go get it. And if they do, then that might add to the validity and the accuracy of my judgment towards them. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to look at these two faces, right? And I want you to try to ask yourself which one is more competent, the person on the left or the person on the right, right? And so there, again, there's no right or wrong answer. Just ask yourself which person is more competent. Now, this experiment was done, and what we find is, well, actually, before we get to it, what most people find is that if we actually change this question and we ask which one is more friendly, it actually changes. So people will often say that the person on the left is more competent and the person on the right is more friendly. And maybe that has to do with, like, I guess this guy has more of like a genuine smile where this one feels a little bit more fake. I don't know. Right? But really, we're getting some judgments about that personality. Now, I know absolutely nothing about these people, but they did this experiment where they showed these pictures and they asked people like who they would likely to vote for. And so this was the results. So over here we have inferred competence of faces. So the higher it goes this way would be the more likely we are to say they're competent. And then this one is a difference in votes. So would the people that they tested vote for this person? And it's interesting because what they find is that when you are showing a face that you feel is not as competent, people are also less likely to vote for them. And then you can kind of see this little pattern of going up, where if they look at the face and they deem this face as being more competent, they're more likely to actually vote for them. So it actually has this behavioral impact of just looking at a person's face. And so it's possible that when we vote, we're voting for these very superficial things just based off of, well, do we like the face of our politicians? Do we like what Kamala Harris looks like? Do we like what Donald Trump looks like, right? Maybe it has to do with that. Now, they've repeated this with other factors too. So, like, for example, names. People will look at names and judge it by the competence level just on a name alone. And same thing, right? So we're making lots of these judgments. Now, here's the thing is that a lot of times these are mostly automatic. We don't spend a lot of time on this. We like look at it and then we go, bam, okay, here's my assumption. We don't really critically analyze those pictures for a long period of time and almost psychoanalyze. We usually are pretty quick about it, right? And what's interesting is there's some validity based on the face. So looking at somebody's face can actually tell you a lot about a person in a lot of spaces. For example, when it comes to extroversion, conscientiousness, and openness to experience, people had a 0.3, basically the R value, which basically means that there's a relationship. It might be more moderate or small, but there's a relationship for certain about, well, can we judge a person on their extroversion, their conscientiousness? So conscientiousness meaning like how organized they are and how open they are to new experience, right? We can base that on a lot just on looking at things. We can do same thing with like how dominant or submissive someone is. Based on looking at somebody, we can kind of figure out, are they more of a dominant personality type, or maybe they're more submissive, or maybe they're more sexual, sexual in nature. Right? Same thing with agreeableness and extroversion for males and females. Now, it seems we can usually judge emotional stability for males in this way, less so for females. But agreeableness and extroversion we can for both, whereas we can kind of judge a male's emotional stability, how well they can handle their emotions, just on their face to some level, right? So, what I'm getting at here is that we actually have a better than chance ability to look at some of these aspects that might seem more physical and well, better but than chance, we might be right about their personalities. So that's kind of interesting. Now, it's possible, though, that this is kind of it's kind of told through some of their actions, though, right? So a friendly person is likely to be more smiley, or at least have more of a friendly demeanor on their face than somebody who might be more introverted and doesn't necessarily want people to approach them. So it might be that we're actually emoting a little bit of our personalities through our faces. So, I don't want you to just think, oh, okay, people are just judging each other no matter what by their face. Sometimes it's how the person's emoting and some of the other types of visual signs of personality as well, right? So, a lot of things we might be able to tell outside of a person's face too, like, for example, extroversion. We find that people that are more extroverted will be more fashionably dressed. They might have a stylish haircut. They might speak in a loud voice. People that are more open might have a variety of different material in their bedroom. So if you go into their bedroom, they might have lots of different genres or different types of books and different topics and different, I don't know, whatever, right? They might have lots of different things like that in their room. People that are conscientious, again, that's more like the organized personality types, might have a very neat bedroom, right? And so we can judge people based on the way they're dressed. We can base it off of like their house and their car and their posture. I mean, have you ever hopped into somebody's car and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so clean in here, and it's like, oh, it smells brand new, but I know it's not brand new because like it's a 10-year-old car, and you're like, what is going on? And it's just that person is very like organized and on top of it, right? Or you've gotten into a car and it has lots of trash all around, and like you're like, okay, well, where's the cockroaches? I can tell that there's going to be a lot of cockroaches in here. Maybe they're lower on that conscientiousness, right? And so you can base a lot on some of those things that might be bleeding out into the community. What are some other ones? Well, actually, interesting enough, we find that music preference might have something to say about a person's personality. So, people who are like more tend towards more like inventive and imaginative, and basically with those types of really out there music preferences tend to be more liberal, and we find that that they tend to be more reflective, and they might be more into complex music. Same thing, that might be more liberal in their personalities. And then, what's interesting is that like curious or risk-taking and physically attractive people might be more prone to listening to like that aggressive or intense music. And a lot of this has to do with like the genre of which you were raised in. So like, if you're more like a Generation X, maybe that's like grunge music from the 80s, right? If you're like a 90s person, then maybe that's going to be more of that like punk style that was really popular in the 90s. And then early 2000s, maybe that's like the really kind of that like Eminem rap that came on to form. Right now it might be, I don't really know, I'm not really on the up and up now, but it seems like the more intense, maybe like screamo music, I don't know, right? But that aggressive, intense music tends to go towards more curious and risk takers personality types, which is kind of interesting. Same thing with storytelling, right? So sophisticated writing and creativity in writing kind of is signs of openness. Somebody is going to be more of that personality type that's wanting to try new experiences and introduce themselves to more. Whereas like using words related to like positive emotions or social orientations are more of that signs of agreeableness. So agreeableness being like a personality trait of going along with the crowd or helping others, right? Or saying yes a lot to people's requests. In the U.S., this is a bigger deal, but handshakes are a big one in the U.S. So firmness is positively related to extroversion and emotional expressiveness, and it seems like more of a weak handshake would be more kind of a shyness or anxiety to a person. And so it seems like we can get some bleeding of person's personality through some of those types of sources. Oop, there we go. So, again, here's another actual experiment that they did. So these are not real people. This is actually a compilation of different portraits of the 10% of, in this case, men who scored highest and lowest on the 5 major personality traits, which we'll go over that later. I've touched on it in previous chapters, but it's basically Ocean or the Big Five, right? So what they did is they basically took the top 5 people who rated high on, or not 5, I don't know how many people it is, but let's say it's the top 5 people that are high on agreeableness, and they basically, you can kind of see how it's like really weird on the sides. Basically, they just like composited those faces together to make like a really high agreeableness face based on those people, and then low agreeableness over here. And so it seems so subtle, right? They've done the same thing with women, and I'll show you theirs in just a second. But people had scored like them on this to corroborate the face, right? So here's the one for females. So again, just a composite of like high trait versus low trait, and it seems like the data shows we're pretty good at distinguishing just on these faces. And you might be looking at these faces and you might be saying, what do you mean? These are so subtle, right? How can we distinguish the differences? And it's interesting because maybe it's just that we're picking up on these small, subtle details, but we've been introduced to society long enough that we're picking up on something that there, right? For example, high extroversion. Maybe there's more of a tilt up in the mouth than low extroversion. I don't know, right? So, but for some reason, we're actually pretty good at picking up certain traits about people. Now, some things can actually impair this ability, right? We're not perfect at it. I say that we're good at it, but really we're not perfect at it. And so there might be like moderating variables. And a moderating variable is a variable that affects the relationship between 2 other variables. So for example, let's say you walk into a party and you're like, okay, I need to find somebody who's going to be really friendly, right? And so maybe you can look around the room and figure out who's friendly. But let's say that the temperature of the room is really hot that day, right? And everybody's really sweaty and their faces are a little bit more droopy because, the sweat is coming down. They're like, oh gosh, it's so hot, right? So that would be like a moderating variable, is the temperature of the room, which might impact the ability to suss out, what somebody's personality is. And so we're trying to find like what makes like a good judge of finding these. And it really depends on what we call context. Right? Context matters, like I said, with that temperature of the room, right? So am I finding, or maybe it's the time of day, right? So maybe it's getting closer to when people are wanting to go to sleep, it's like, the friendliness, even though they're very friendly, that friendliness might not show through as much because the context is mattering in that moment, right? Now, when we look at the accuracy between how well men versus women can judge in this way, we find mixed results, right? Women, though, tend to be better at judging extroversion and positive emotionality at like zero acquaintance. So if they've never met somebody and they're sitting at a table together, a woman generally is a little bit better at picking out who's going to be higher on extroversion and also about who has more of that positive emotionality. So more happier, more joy, all that stuff. Overall, though, women are slightly more accurate than men, it seems like, even with that. But I will say that males that are extroverted, well-adjusted, unconcerned with what others think, actually are better judges as well. And then for females who are more open, maybe have a wide range of interest, and value their independence, they tend to be a little bit better judges as well in this way. Also, people that are high in communion tend to be better at judges of personality. So what do I mean by communion? So these are people that are going to be invested in developing and maintaining relationships, right? So that person that's really interested in having relationships, they're going to be better judges. Same thing with like people who emphasize interpersonal relationships, kind of goes hand in hand. But somebody who really wants to have those types of relationships are going to be better. Also, people that judge people more favorably. They look for the best part of people. They tend to be more accurate, which is interesting too. So people that are more socially skilled. People that struggle in social situations probably aren't the best judges of character. People that are skilled in being social, or agreeable, they tend to be a little bit more able to be better judges of character or judges of personality, right? And so that's interesting. And also attributionally complex. These are realizing that these are people who realize that others are complex and that there's multifacets to people. Those people that kind of understand that and really are okay with that tend to be better and more accurate as well. People that are open, same thing, right? Now, also, people that are psychologically well-adjusted. So if you have really good mental health, for example, you tend to be a better judge of personality as well. And it kind of makes sense. A lot of times people that are mentally not healthy will fall into, let's say, cognitive traps where they're like, oh, everybody hates me, or everybody's against me. Those types of negative kind of thoughts that kind of linger for somebody who's depressed or anxious, right? Those types of thoughts generally will basically impede on a person's ability to be non-judgmental in that aspect. But somebody who's well-adjusted will be able to be a little bit more accurate. Right? Same thing with somebody with high social sensitivity. So if they're, again, that kind of goes hand in hand with what I said before. Oh, this is an interesting one. Somebody who's low in the dark triad traits. And I don't know if I talked about the dark triad traits, but the dark triad traits are 3 different traits that people have, and these are not necessarily the best traits. So this would be psychopathy, which would be like how little a person cares about others. Machiavellism, so somebody who uses words to hurt other people, and sadism, so somebody who enjoys watching somebody else's pain. So we call those the dark triad traits. Now, if you are low in those traits, which is actually probably a good thing, so it means that you do care about people and you don't use your words to hurt people and you don't enjoy watching people get hurt, then you're a better judge of personality. So that's interesting as well. Now, this is interesting too, because it's not just about who's a good judge. Judging, the person who's judging matters too, but you could also have somebody who's a good target. So what we call that is judgeability. How accurate a person is typically judged by others. So a good target, it's like how much does that person want to show their personality to some level, right? And so people vary more in how accurately they can be judged than how accurately they judge others. So, some people don't want to show their personalities that much, and they'll keep it in. And it doesn't even matter if you're high or low in any particular trait. Maybe sometimes you don't want people to know that. And so maybe you're just not a good target, which is kind of interesting. So, a good target generally is somebody who's going to be stable, well organized, and usually has more consistent behaviors. And then also, again, somebody who's psychologically well adjusted. Those are going to be easier targets, people that we are trying to figure out. And extroverted and agreeable people that are high in those traits generally will be better targets as well. And then related to to psychological health and happiness. Again, that kind of goes back to the psychologically well-adjusted. Yeah. Now, this is kind of illustrates that sometimes it's the good, when it's the target that matters more than the judge. So over here we see this. This is how basically good the judge is. And so we see very, very small variability of like a good judge versus a bad judge, right? Variability is very, very poor here. Whereas good targets vary widely, right? So some people are going to be super easy to kind of suss out their personality, and then some people are going to be really hard. And so there's way more variability over if you're a good target or not versus if you're a good judge or not. Yeah. Now, it also matters about the traits you're looking for, because traits matter when it comes to like being accurate as well. So, is it a trait that's easy to observe or highly visible? So, for example, you might say like, okay, talkativeness, for example. You're going to be able to observe talkativeness pretty quickly if you put a person around a bunch of people, right? Versus like rumination being like how many thoughts are kind of swirling in their heads over and over again. That's more private. That's going to be more difficult for you to kind of observe. Now, they might give you some what's it called? They might give you some clues, right? So they might say, I can't get this thought out of my head, or maybe they just perseverate on the same topic over and over again when you talk to them, right? So they might give you some clues, but it's much easier to just observe how talkative a person is rather than the thoughts in their head. Same thing with like extroversion. Somebody who's extroverted, it's going to be easier to kind of suss out because they're going to be right in front of you, ready to talk to you, versus somebody who's introverted, right? May not. Or like emotional stability, right? So somebody who is going like, I should say like extroversion is going to be easy for you to suss out, but like emotional stability is not. So how stable a person is with their emotions, that's not going to be as easy. So certain traits are going to be easier for you to physically see than others. Now, there's also probably a evolutionary basis for this. So, for example, it might have something to do with like, for example, a trait like sociosexuality. Now, sociosexuality is a willingness to engage in sexual relationships with like minimal acquaintanceships. Basically, it's somebody who's wanting multiple partners and really quickly, right? So they're not really they would like to have some sort of sexual connection with you on a social level, but without really getting to know you very well, right? So if you're high in sociosexuality, you'd be more of that personality type. Somebody low in it would be somebody who's like, no, I want a commitment, or I want to get to know you very well before we get to that intimate place, right? So the thing is that when it comes to like finding connections between in terms of like sexuality, right? Finding a good compatible partnership, being able to suss that out quickly based on maybe what they look like is important, right? So maybe that in certain traits, it might be actually to our benefit that we are looking for those signs quicker than others. Now, also, we need good information, right? So information that we're getting in order to be accurate has to be good information. So there's something called the acquaintanceship effect. And that's the judgments by people who have known or observed the target for longer. They tend to be more accurate, right? So a good informant is going to be more accurate. So if I know you, right? If I'm an acquaintance of you, I'm going to be a better judge than somebody who doesn't know you at all. So, going back to those like pictures, for example, right? I don't know those people. I'm just looking off of them. I'm probably going to be a worse person at being accurate at identifying it than somebody who does know those people. They might be able to say, hey, that person actually is friendly, or that person actually is competent, or maybe they're not, right? But they're going to be a little bit more. Now, the other one is boundary. Boundary is going to be basically, it's like, okay, they're not really an acquaintanceship, but basically I've observed that person for like 5 minutes, right? So if you've observed somebody for 5 minutes, then you're gonna know their personality a little bit better, or be a little bit more accurate with your assumptions about their personality. Now, this isn't really conscious, but what I want you to see in this one is kind of how this might change. right? So this was a experiment where they basically were looking at that boundary where they let people meet somebody that they're going to base their personality off of for 5 minutes to 30 minutes, right? And they wanted to see, okay, on an individual level, how accurate was the person at kind of figuring out their personality. And as you can see, spending 30 minutes with a person, they become way more accurate than if they only spend 5 minutes with somebody. Now, you might see this when it says consensus. What this is it's that inter-rater reliability that we're talking about. So this is like, let's say that you're over here. This might be like, let's say you're hiring somebody and you're like, oh, this person's going to be really great to work with, right? So this is like, okay, do both of you agree after 5 minutes that this person is going to be somebody great to work with, right? You might be like, no, I don't think so. And this person's like, maybe, right? But you might notice that as both of you get to know that person, it actually does improve to some extent, right? But your personal accuracy gets better. Consensus also gets better, but not quite as steep. Yeah. Now, it also has to do with the quality of the information, right? So there's going to be certain situations that will affect the quality of your information that you're gathering. For example, let's say that I want to measure a person's courage, right? So let's say I get 5 minutes and all I get to do is watch that person walk down the street. Well, that's a weak situation, right? Because when they're walking down the street, they can do lots of different things. They can skip down the street, but that doesn't show me courage. They could run down the street. That doesn't show me courage. They could do cartwheels down the street. That doesn't show me courage. They could walk. That doesn't show me courage, right? But that's not a good situation to evaluate courage. Now, let's say that I put them into more of an emergency situation. So I create an emergency where it basically constricts the person's behavior. So, I light a house on fire. This is so unethical. You would never do this, right? But let's say I set a house on fire and I put, a puppy inside. I'm a monster, right? But I put a puppy inside of this burning building. Now, I basically have constricted it so that the person has to decide where they get two behaviors, really. They either act or they don't act, right? But that's a strong situation where I'm going to learn a lot about that person's trait of courage. They're either going to run inside to save the puppy or they're going to run away, in which case I'm going to say, okay, they are less courageous or more courageous. So the situation matters in the quality of the information you're gathering. Additionally, might be difficult or emotionally arousing situations also might play a part. So a good way to learn something extra about a person is to put them into a difficult or emotionally arousing situation and then get a sense of things. So, for example, neuroticism. Neuroticism is, basically emotional stability, right? So somebody who's high in neurotic behaviors are going to be somebody who can't handle emotionally arousing situations. Those are the people that are going to start breaking down and crying, maybe try to run away from the situation, right, in a difficult situation. And somebody who is low in neuroticism is going to be able to, the person that kind of says, okay, look, I can handle this. I can deal with this situation. What do I need to do first, right? And so putting them into those situations are going to, again, give you a better quality. Now, when it comes to like thoughts and feelings versus daily activities, watching a person talk about thoughts and feelings tend to result in higher agreement with ratings from the self and close friends, right? So if I listen to a person's thoughts and feelings or watch them in a daily activity, I'm going to get a lot more information about a person's personality, right? And then same thing with like unstructured versus structured situations. So unstructured situations like at a party, for example, result in much more accurate judgments than structured situations, right? Because and this has to do a lot with because in structured situations, a lot of times people will have roles or duties assigned to them, and therefore it kind of puts a little bit of a constraint on the ability to show their emotions. So what do I mean by that? So if I say, okay, an unstructured situation would be you at a party, right? So at a party, you are able to show the full range of your personality because there's really no constraints on it. It's unstructured. You can walk up to people, or if you're not into that, you can walk away from people. You can try the, I don't know, beer bong table and play on the beer bong table, or you can chill on the couch with some people, or you can play a card game at the wherever that is, or you could be the bartender, or you can, there's so many different roles that you get to choose to do at a party. Whereas, let's say that you're at your place of business. Let's say you work at Starbucks, for example, and you're the cash register, and well, maybe you're you're dealing with a rough customer, but you constantly have a smile on your face. So people might be like, "Oh my gosh, that person is so extroverted," and it's like, "No, I'm not really extroverted, but I'm getting paid to be extroverted in this situation, right? Because I've been assigned the duty of being extroverted and dealing with customers." Right? So I may not get a lot of good quality information by looking at a structured situation versus an unstructured situation. Okay, so this is actually a model, and it's called the realistic accuracy model. And what it's trying to do is trying to explain how a judge can be accurate, and is it even possible for them to be accurate, really? And so you might sit here and think, okay, well, we're focusing more on the judge, so why are these arrows pointing towards the judge in this situation, right? Well, the judge is getting all of its information from the target, and that's why the target is giving this information to the judge to make relevant, accurate judgments about this target's personality. And so there's 4 different stages. Right? So the first is relevance. So that information that target is giving has to be relevant information of the trait being judged, right? So, let's say that the judge wants to judge, I'm going to go back to the original one with courage, right? So if I'm not seeing any behaviors that are relevant to courage, well, then I can't be accurate about my assumption of this target. But let's say that this person is giving me relevant information about his courage, right? Then it goes to this next one. How available is it? So is it in a manner that this judge can actually see it? So I'm doing this relevant activity if I'm the target, right? But is it available so that the judge can witness it, right? So that's that availability part. Is it in a manner in which the judge can actually see it? Because if the judge can't see it, now I don't have an accurate assumption, right? But if I have this person as a target, right, he's given me relevant information. This is information about him being courageous, and then it is available where the judge could see it if he wants to. It goes now to the detection. Does the judge even notice the information? Because, we're always doing other things. Usually it's not like when we're looking at this, it's usually, let's say you're at a party and you're talking to somebody, right? And maybe you're trying to figure out if this person at the other party is a potential partner for you, right? You're trying to judge them on their certain traits, right? But if you're not paying attention to it, even if it's available to you, even if it's relevant to you, if you're not paying attention, that detection part, then you can't make that accurate. But let's say it's relevant, it's available, you've detected it, and now it's how well they utilize it. And that's how accurately you can remember it and correctly interpret the information, right? So what if it's relevant information. Let's say that this target runs into a burning building to save a puppy, right? That's relevant. It's available where you're able to see it. You've actually seen it, but then your interpretation of it is, oh, the fire isn't that big of a deal, right? Well, that's your interpretation of the information. And so maybe you're like, it's not that courageous. It's like, or maybe you're like, oh my gosh, this person is so amazing because they saved this kitten from this burning building, in which case you are actually, utilizing that information and what you've remembered to interpret it, right? So that's feeds into the accuracy of how well a person can judge a target on their personality traits. Now, we can improve accuracy by focusing on each stage, but we do this through training, for example. Now, there's some evidence that accuracy can be trained based on telling judges how targets are rated by experts and why. How are they how other people view that person and why do they view it on it. And so actually, like if you're ever interested in profiling, right, for like police or CIA or FBI, right, they're trained in this to some level of trying to figure out, okay, how can I be better at being more accurate? We can also attend to relevant cues. So, we're looking at, okay, what are some of the clues that are relevant to me, and really kind of highlighting those. And then we can create the right interpersonal environments, right? So putting them into an environment, those situations, where they can flourish and be able to show their personality. So we create the right interpersonal environment where other people feel free to be themselves, and therefore we can judge them. And then also, and this is probably a harder one, even though it's easy to say, is be attentive, right? Pay attention if you're wanting to judge somebody else's character and personality. You have to actually pay attention to that person. And the more you're paying attention, the better accuracy you're going to have. Yep. Okay. Now, accuracy of self-knowledge. So this is, this is self-knowledge being like your ability to look at yourself and your own personality. Actually, this is interesting because your ability to look at yourself in a really accurate way is a pretty good indicator of your own mental health, right? So people who are healthy and secure and wise enough to see the world as it is tend to see themselves more accurately too. And so, accurate self-knowledge allows people to make good decisions on important issues. So that's why being able to look at ourselves and our own personalities is actually a great way to figure out, hey, is this person actually mentally healthy? Now, the process of actually gaining this self-knowledge has to do with that RAM stages. Again, going back to here, this is the RAM model, right? Realistic accuracy model. And so the process of getting self-knowledge is very similar to that RAM stage as well, right? So, finding relevant, information about a trait, making sure it's available to yourself, making sure you're even paying attention to it, making sure you're analyzing it and utilizing it appropriately. FYI, you will probably have a question on this on the test. So I would know the RAM stages, but those are going to be really important in your own self-knowledge. Now, we know our emotional experiences better than others do. So when it comes to self-knowledge, we're going to know our own emotional experiences better than others. Right? This is one area where people generally are a little bit more accurate in their own abilities for themselves. And, I'm sure you've been in the situation or talked to somebody who's been in a situation where, you're like, hey, you did an amazing job. Let's say that they had to give a lecture, right? Or give a presentation. And they give the presentation, they come off and you're like, oh my gosh, you did so amazing. You did so good. And the person's like, really? Because I felt like I was like going to poop myself. Like I was not doing okay, right? And it's like, oh, I didn't know that you felt that way because you seem so just so confident up there. Well, your own emotional experiences better than others do, right? But interestingly enough, others tend to know your behaviors better than you do. So, people tend to think that others would behave the same way that they did, and therefore they do not learn as much about how their behaviors differ from others and are related to their personality. But time may put our own behavior in perspective because when people think about behaviors in the past, they're more likely to see their patterns of behavior and how it differs from others. So it's easier for us to kind of, look at others' behaviors more than ourselves. So acquaintance judgments predict better behaviors than other self-judgments too. It's interesting. And then, paying attention to yourself can be really difficult. So this is something that, it can be hard to pay attention to yourself. All the time, all you see is what you decide to do and not what others would do in the same situation, right? And so this is difficult to compare to what others do. So paying attention to yourself is actually pretty difficult. And lastly, people tend to attribute their own behavior to the situation. So if you think back to like social psychology, if you've taken social psychology, or even maybe like your intro to psych days, you might remember the term actor-observer bias. And actor-observer bias is basically that people tend to attribute situations more to themselves, and then attributions more to others. What do I mean by that? Let's say that you show up late to class one day. You might be like, oh, I'm so sorry I showed up late to class. It was because my alarm clock didn't go off, and then there was a lot of traffic on my way over here, right? It's the situation you were in that made you late. Whereas, let's say that you're in class and somebody stumbles in late, you might be like, oh, that person's always late. Like, that's part of who they are. That's their, you've attributed that, right? So we tend to attribute our own behavior to the situation. And that's because we think others would do the same thing in that situation, right? We're like, oh, if I was in that situation, then it would, I would do it this way. Yeah. Now, how do we improve this self-knowledge, right? It takes a lot of introspection. Introspection, you have to look into your own mind and understand who you are. Introspection is looking at yourself, right? And so it's working on that utilization, so that interpretation of that information stage. And it might be easier with the passage of time, but you attempt to be mindful and non-evaluative, basically, not making judgments so much as evaluating yourself. And you pay close attention to the current experience that you're having. Right? Now, the other thing is, people who want to improve this self-knowledge seek feedback. Right? Especially helpful for aspects that are obvious to everyone else, but maybe not to yourself. And it works at the availability and detection stages, right? So how available is the information and how well you've detected it, right? So where introspection, more of that utilization stage. Seeking feedback is more of the detection stage, right? And the detection stage and the availability stage, right? Now, this can be either through direct feedback or maybe from reading subtle, maybe nonverbal indicators of what other people think of you. That's another form of feedback. If somebody didn't respond the way you thought they would, well, then maybe there's some information in there for you. Also, observe your own behavior on that kind of train of thought, right? Put yourself into different situations, try new things, meet new people. This works on that relevance stage, right? How relevant it is, right? So putting yourself in different situations, you might find that you're putting yourselves into more relevant stages for certain traits so that you can figure out, hey, where am I on that trait? Now, this could be limited by family or cultural factors, right? So if you, for example, are part of a culture that self-expression is not encouraged, and that's the case for a lot, right? Then, or maybe there's like strong pressures to certain educational objectives or career paths, right? So you may be more interested in a certain career path, but because there's a lot of pressure from your family to go into certain career paths, you decide to go that route, right? This could limit your own ability to kind of figure out who your own personality is, because there's a lot of other factors that are involved, and that's something to keep in mind as well. But yeah, you just need to have, for good self-knowledge, it's actually really good to have, because it helps you to make wise choices. And it's about education or occupation or relationships. Good self-knowledge can help you in a lot of different ways. Now, here's the rub. We are constantly being judged by others, and there's really no way around that per se. But understanding others will help you be more accurate, and hopefully it could lead to better interactions between you and those other people and the decisions that you make. And so this is good for ourselves. We're being judged by ourselves and others, but we want to try to be more accurate. So maybe that can help. And with that is all I have for this lecture. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time, and I will be happy to hop on Zoom or email you back with any answers that you might have. And I will see you at the next lecture. Well, I will talk to you in the next lecture. Goodbye.